My father-in-law forced my wife to divorce me by threatening her sister's life. I had been married to Sarah for 3 years, and for almost all of them, her family made sure I knew exactly what I was worth to them. Nothing. The Vance name meant a lot in our city. Her father, Arthur, ran a massive real estate firm with his name on 3 buildings downtown. To him, I was just a guy with a regular job and a family nobody had ever heard of. In his mind, I was just a mistake his daughter made that he was eventually going to correct. I remember one dinner in particular on our 2nd anniversary. Sarah had asked me to come, hopeful in that quiet way she got whenever she thought her father might finally see something good in me. Arthur spent the whole night talking business with a colleague he brought along. At one point, without even looking up from his plate, he casually mentioned that Sarah used to date a surgeon before me. He said it lightly, like a passing comment about the weather. He looked across the table at her and said, "You could have had an actual life. Instead, you're paying his rent." Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She didn't defend me. I knew why. She had learned a long time ago that defending someone at that table only made her father push back twice as hard. I sat there and said nothing either, because I had made the exact same calculation. I took those small cuts for 3 years to keep the peace. But the peace was a complete lie. What really kept me quiet was what Arthur held over her. Sarah's younger sister, Mia, had a chronic kidney condition that needed ongoing, expensive treatments neither of us could afford on our own. Arthur paid the medical bills every single time, and he never let us forget it. Last Friday, he decided he was done letting the arrangement stand. He called us both to his house, and when we sat down across from him in his study, he slid a folder across the desk. They were divorce papers, already filled out, with my name spelled correctly. Without asking for our opinion, he looked at me and said, "You're out of my daughter's life by the end of the week." I leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye, and said, "You don't get to decide that." He didn't even look at me when he answered. He turned his head toward Sarah instead and said, "If you don't sign these right now, Mia's treatment stops today. I'll make sure every specialist in this city knows not to touch her case." Sarah's face went completely white. She looked at her father with a mix of pure hatred and absolute terror, because she knew he meant every word. She leaned across the desk, her voice breaking, and begged, "Dad, please, don't do this to her." "Sign it," he commanded, tapping his finger against the wood. She was shaking so badly the pen almost slipped out of her hand. I wanted to reach across that desk and tell her to stop, but I knew if I did, I would be gambling with her sister's life. I didn't have another way to pay for those doctors, and giving her false hope would have just been another kind of cruelty. She signed her name while crying silently. Arthur smiled like a man closing a business deal, pointed toward the hallway and said, "Get out of my house and stay away from my daughter." I didn't argue. I went upstairs, packed one bag, and walked out into the cold night without saying anything else. I wasn't going to make Sarah watch a fight on top of the trauma she just went through. I rented a cheap motel room on the edge of town that night. The light above the sink flickered, and the bedspread looked like it had seen 3 decades of other people's worst nights. I sat on the edge of that mattress for a very long time. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my wife, though that was a heavy, hollow ache in my chest. I kept thinking about Mia, 17 years old, having her medical treatments used as a weapon against her own sister. And there wasn't a single thing I could do about it. For 3 years, I told myself that swallowing Arthur's disrespect was a noble sacrifice. I thought I was taking the hits to protect the family. But sitting in that cheap light, I finally realized the ugly truth. My silence had never been my sacrifice. It had always been his leverage. Arthur owned Mia's health, which meant he owned Sarah, which meant I was just a guest who could be thrown out the second he got bored. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling like a man who had spent 3 years building a life on ground that was never mine to build on. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. The man on the other end introduced himself as a corporate attorney and asked, "Am I speaking with David Reyes?" "You have the wrong number," I told him, ready to hang up. "Thomas Sterling was your father's father," he explained. "Your father cut ties with the family before you were born, but since he passed away, you were Thomas's only living heir." My dad died when I was 9. The only thing I knew about his side of the family was that he never talked about them. I went to the lawyer's office downtown just because I didn't have anything else to do that morning. His office took up half a floor, with glass walls looking out over the entire city. He slid a folder across his desk that was even thicker than the one Arthur had pushed at me the night before. He looked at me seriously and said, "Your grandfather built an investment firm over 4 decades. You are his only living relative, which means everything comes to you." Before I looked at the numbers, I asked him why my dad walked away in the first place. The lawyer explained that my grandfather had built his fortune ruthlessly, constantly choosing the business over his own family. My dad grew up hating that. The last time they spoke, my dad told him he would rather raise his son poor and present than rich and absent. My grandfather respected that choice and never interfered, watching over me from a distance for 20 years until the day he died. I sat there letting it sink in. It didn't erase what my dad went through, but it did mean the billions of dollars sitting in that folder actually cost someone something. It wasn't just a lucky break. It was the heavy result of a family that broke itself apart trying to figure out what actually mattered in life. I looked across the desk at the lawyer and gave him my first 2 orders. I tapped the folder and said, "First, look into Vance Real Estate. Second, find out everything about my grandfather's medical charities. I want Mia Vance's kidney treatments fully covered permanently through a private foundation that Arthur can never touch." He came back an hour later with the financial records on Vance Real Estate. Arthur's firm looked completely solid from the outside, just like his whole life did. But underneath it, he was carrying massive debt he had been hiding from his own board of directors for 2 years. He was desperately shopping for an anonymous buyer to save him before the whole company collapsed. I handed the files back to the lawyer and said, "Buy it, quietly, through whatever shell companies keep my name off the paperwork until the deal is done." The lawyer hesitated for a second and said, "Setting up the medical foundation first isn't standard business protocol." "I don't care," I told him firmly. "Make sure the medical foundation gets done today before we do anything else." Monday morning arrived. Arthur was hosting a massive board meeting to close the deal with his anonymous buyer. I walked into that building wearing the exact same coat I wore when I was thrown out of his house 3 nights earlier. I pushed open the heavy boardroom doors. Arthur's face turned bright red before he even fully registered who was standing there. He jumped to his feet, pointing at the door, and shouted, "Get him out of here right now!" I didn't move. I just walked past him and sat down in the empty chair at the far end of the table. The lawyer walked in right behind me, dropped the finalized ownership contracts directly in front of Arthur, and said, "Mr. Reyes is the controlling owner of the Sterling Group. As of 9 o'clock this morning, that includes Vance Real Estate." Arthur picked up the papers with hands that were actually shaking. He read them twice, refusing to believe it. He looked across the table at me and said, "This isn't possible. You're nothing." But the words didn't have any weight anymore. They just sounded like a desperate old man realizing he had lost. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You are removed from the board effective immediately. You can clear your office today." He looked around the table at the board members who had been loyal to him for years. Nobody defended him. A man named Preston, who had worked under Arthur for a decade, finally looked up and said, "You hid the massive debt from all of us for 2 years, Arthur. We would have fought through it together if you were honest, but you gambled our jobs to protect your own pride." Arthur didn't have an answer for that. He picked up his small box of personal items and walked out of the room without looking at me again. A few minutes later, Sarah rushed into the boardroom after someone on the floor told her about the commotion. She stopped in the doorway, completely confused to see me sitting where her father usually sat, with corporate lawyers standing behind me and her father's chair empty. She looked at me and asked, "David, what is going on here?" I stood up and walked toward her. I didn't brag about the money, and I didn't demand she come back to me. Instead, I told her the only thing that actually mattered. I looked into her eyes and said, "Mia's treatment is covered permanently through a private foundation. Your father has no access to it, and her health will never be used as a weapon against you again." Sarah looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face finally broke. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at me and whispered, "You didn't have to do that first." "I wanted to," I replied softly. "I'm not asking you to just walk out of here with me today. I just want you to finally have a real choice for once in your life. One that doesn't have your sister's survival sitting on the other side of it." She looked at the empty chair where her father used to sit, took a deep breath, and said, "I need some time to process everything." "Take all the time you need," I told her with a soft smile. "I'm not going anywhere." I meant it. My grandfather had spent 20 years waiting patiently in the shadows, choosing not to force his way into a life he had every right to claim. Standing in that boardroom, I realized I could easily manage a few weeks of that exact same patience for the woman I actually loved.